All right, I think we are live as far as I know.
Woohoo!
So, anyway,
Yeah, shows
um,
shows the live thing on my screen. So,
cool. Right on, right on. So, what is up, guys? This is Sean and Brian
and
here.
Brian,
Yep. Super Farley Bros back at it again. It has been a minute, a long minute. It's been like a
yep.
year.
Yeah, I've been looking at some of our past videos, and it's been a while, so it's been complicated. And this is
Yeah,
what we found to be able to continue our videos and our content.
exactly. And I think so. The main reason this idea kind of started was I was looking at some of our old content too, and I really wanted to keep this going, but I live a couple hours away from Brian now, and so it's not as easy for us to just be like, hey, cool, let's make this video. And it takes editing, a lot of other things that go into each of our videos. So we figured that doing these Google Hangout live streams, and we're gonna see if the live stream goes okay, but doing these videos to review and do podcasts on old games. Things that we played in the past, things that we never got to, things that were maybe too old for us when we were younger, and that we just want to tackle now.
Yep. And I think it's kind of funny because as the channel was kind of dying off because we were so far away from each other, Sean was still doing his Sean's Corner thing, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, like what's gonna happen. And I kind of died off on my bits with Brian, but I'm gonna start with that again. But Sean kind of was the one that initiated this idea. We were on vacation, and he had this good idea to start podcasts because they're popular and there's something that we can do far away from each other. It doesn't mean that we have to be in the same city or anything, and we can still get things accomplished. And it'd be a lot of fun, kind of reviewing these different videos and looking over. For me, I think especially the nostalgia part of it, but it's kind of cool to talk about together.
Yeah, and there's for us mainly we grew up on the N64. That was our first like actual console. I mean, we had Game Boys and stuff, but so mainly we wanted to tackle mostly Nintendo. Obviously, that's where we play most games. We do have PlayStation games that we might tackle in the future, but it's going to be easier for us to do these weekly podcasts every Sunday, in the evening or kind of the middle of the day, to tackle older games because we're able to kind of get through them quicker. It's not like we can do a week of The
Yeah.
Witcher 3 and then have that ready by Sunday. So it makes so much sense for us to tackle a lot of old games, like all the old Zelda games, even on the Super Nintendo and NES. And we're kind of getting that set up so that both of us can play those throughout the week and then review it, chat with you guys about our thoughts on the game, the nostalgic value of it, what makes it a good game if you don't have a nostalgia kind of connection with it. Kind of a lot
Yeah.
of things that go into it.
Yeah, the histories of it, of the game, like the designing of it, or for Link's Awakening, what we'll talk about in a little bit, kind of how it switched over from the SNES to the Game Boy and then the Game Boy Color, right?
Well, Link to the Past came before Link's
Link to
Awakening.
the Past was SNES to
Right.
to right. So my bad. The Game Boy to the Game Boy Advanced, right? Game
Yeah.
Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced.
Yeah. Wait, are you talking about Links to the
So
Past?
Link's Awakening now. So Link's
Okay,
Awakening was Game
Link's
Boy Color,
Awakening was
Game
Game
Boy.
Boy to Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
There you
So
go. There you go.
Sean knows more of the histories about that than I do. So,
So
so yeah, the story, and then we'll talk about the story of the game, progression, how we felt about how that went, the gameplay of it. So, get talking about that about Link's Awakening in a second. But that'll be pretty much the format that we'll be covering for all the other games that we review as well.
yeah, totally. And I think that as we get into it a little bit more, we'll kind of catch our stride a little bit too. The podcasting thing is new for us, but we're excited. We want to get these out every single Sunday. It's something that we can commit to and that we have committed to. So that way, each week we have content coming out for you guys, and it's just something fun for us to do as well as brothers that we get to keep in contact and tackle some of these old games that we grew up love playing, or we know a lot of people love playing growing up and never got the chance to get around to it. So, like Brian said, Link's Awakening. We're gonna, I guess, kind of dive into that. That's the game that we wanted to tackle because we're both kind of excited for that game to come out on the Switch. But I don't know. I guess you could say like we didn't know how excited we were, Brian. I don't know.
Yeah, when it first the Nintendo Direct came out and first saw the video of it, well, Sean saw it first. You saw it first, and so you're like, "Hey, check out. Have you seen the Nintendo Direct?" And typically, I'm the one that's like on top of like the Nintendo Directs. But after Smash came out, then I was like less on top of it. But the whole Direct went through, and the very end was Link's Awakening, and it opens up the same way that the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance titles opened up, where you have Link and the thunderstorm and everything. Huh?
Game Boy Color. I keep saying Game Boy Advance.
Well, Game Boy Color and Advance, right? When the DX came out.
DX is on Game Boy Color.
Game Boy Color Advance. Sorry. They're the same thing to me.
No, they're not.
For me. Anyway.
Lost your train of thought.
Yeah, the Direct came out. Sean made me look at it, and anyway, very, very cutesy kind of animation and everything of the gameplay,
almost claymation status looking.
Yeah.
But I got amped. That intro, the artwork on that intro was so good, and the weird thing about it is like our first Game Boy Color Zelda games were not even Link's Awakening. They were Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons. So we don't have really any nostalgic value, or any, maybe not value, but feelings towards this game. And so we thought it'd be really fun to tackle a game first that we love the series. We love Zelda. Zelda's like one of the first games we ever played was Ocarina of Time, and that we owned. And we kind of wanted to tackle a game that was still in a franchise we knew, but a game that we hadn't played before. So we didn't really have a tie to it. And then obviously the new Link's Awakening is coming out, the remake for the Switch. So it kind of, there's some excitement there. There might be a reason for you guys to, people listening to pick up this game and play it and see if it's.
And obviously, like you were saying, Sean, obviously I am not won't have any nostalgic value to it, considering I have no idea, because I played it on the emulator, so Link's Awakening. So that's why I got it mixed up. It was Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, whatever. So
I'm
lost a little bit as far as that goes. But
and we never had we had cousins and stuff that had Super Nintendo, so we never played A Link to the Past, right? Until we got it, I think, on the Game Boy Advance, and that's what you're thinking of when we had the smaller cartridge that had Four Swords Adventure and Link to the Past that they ported over. And so that was kind of our experience with, like, we had played through Link to the Past on Game Boy, the rectangular
Advance.
The Game Boy Advance, the flat one. And so the cool thing about that is, and kind of diving into the history with the game, is I think that so it originally came out on the original Game Boy. It was the first Zelda game on the Game Boy, and then they ported it over, just added the color to it, and like one dungeon, changed a little bit with some of the bosses as far as the difficulty, but it's basically the same game, just with color in it for the XD or the DX version. DX. Yeah.
DX.
Yeah, DX version. And so that's the version that we played. And obviously I wasn't going to play the Game Boy version if I could play the Game Boy Color version on the emulator. So that's what we did while we were on our trip. And I don't know, I felt like you could definitely tell where it pulled from Link's oh man, I'm getting not Link's Awakening. Link to the Past. Links to the Past. Yeah, that's where you see how much it pulled from A Link to the Past, because that was the original game, and then it was basically a side project at the beginning when they're working on Link's Awakening. So you see a lot of the assets that they pulled over. It's just obviously not on as good as a system, because the SNES had a lot more power to it than the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, so I looked up a little bit of the process of switching over, upgrading it to DX, and something interesting is all the bugs that they had beforehand and the changes that they had from Japanese to English. And so I thought it was hilarious because as far as the Japanese to English goes, just because for the most part, most games, not necessarily Nintendo, but most games that get switched over from Japanese to English go through a pretty hardy censoring process.
Right.
And so I just thought it was funny because there's the mermaid in the bay where one of the temples is at, or the dungeons. And in the Japanese version, she loses her top, whereas in the English version, she just loses her necklace.
Oh yeah, that would not fly.
So
would not fly.
yeah.
That's kind of like my discussion where I've talked about I've kind of chatted about in the past how much I love Super Nintendo the box look. I think I have a video on it.
The box art.
The box art, yeah, thank you. The box art is so much better in Japan than it was in America, and that's not for all cases, obviously, but it's just they kind of got away with a little bit more, I think, than they could over here in the States. A little more censorship. Yeah. Had to worry about parents that weren't going to let their kids play the games because they saw risque images on the cover art and stuff. So it makes sense that the gameplay.
It's interesting that that's not necessarily. I mean, like, it would appear not to be necessarily a big deal to the Japanese people and their culture if they're just to them it's just like, oh yeah, whatever. But
it's not a problem. It doesn't bother them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the history of the game's fun, and that's kind of what got me excited to play it as well. It's like there's this little hidden gem that's on a handheld that a lot of people, including us, who are big Zelda fans, like Brian's a huge Zelda fan, and I am too. I love Zelda, but I think Brian, especially with more modern Zeldas, I think he was more up to date with Breath of the Wild than anybody else I knew. Like every single theory and video or anything before and as it was leading up to this new hidden Zelda game that no one knew about, Brian was all over it. So it's kind of fun to dive into some of these old games. And again, like I said, not only have we not played this one, but our first Zelda games are 3D Zeldas, sort of Ocarina of Time. So 2D Zeldas, we don't have this crazy, like people will go down to their graves saying that Link to the Past is the greatest game ever. And obviously Link's Awakening is taken from that. And so we don't have that same feeling. We're like, Ocarina, I feel like is better.
Yeah.
You know, because
just because if you start off with, whoops, my camera fell. You start off with, for us, for instance, if you start off with a 3D game and then not necessarily downgrade, but essentially downgrade the graphics to 2D, it's something you've grown up with 3D graphics your whole life. And then you just have the handheld games that are the 2D games, like Pokemon or whatever. Right. And then you downgrade a normal experience of Zelda being 3D, and you technically downgrade that to a 2D experience. Like, oh, it's old-fashioned, it's not as good. All these thoughts come to mind when you first start it because it's not what you're familiar with, and it's something that is, for me at least, was on a lower level. You know, you have your 3D games on a upper level than the 2D games. And so dropping down to these games that I hadn't grown up playing is just, you have to like almost make yourself do it in order to experience it, because otherwise you're just going to have this preconceived notion that, it's not as good just because it's an older game, you know, on a less complicated or less high-tech system. Sure,
yeah. And I totally agree with that, because for me, I felt like I really wanted to play it because I wanted to get excited for the next game, and I hadn't played it before, another Zelda game. Like, I want to beat all the Zelda games for the most part, besides like the CDI games. I never will probably play those, but you know, like for the most part, it is a main Zelda game. It's kind of thought of as a I don't know, like not a mainline story game, but it's kind of what makes it fun and makes it exciting. And we also just got announced that other Zelda game that's totally a spin-off game. So that's kind of what gets the excitement for me, I felt like, and what made me want to play it. But there were a lot of things that I did have to push through to kind of see what was so unique and so, I don't know, like what made it such a good game, or what makes it a good game, because it did have its faults, and it does have its faults.
Yeah.
And things that don't get me as excited as many other Zelda games.
It's true. Well, let's start off with let's talk about the story of the progression of the game.
Yeah, sure.
And move on. So, so what did you think? Because I know the beginning. It's one of those Zelda games where it actually has like a starting kind of cutscene at the very beginning. Obviously, it doesn't have anything else afterwards.
Goosebumps. But I get goosebumps every time.
Yeah. And even not playing it growing up, and you see that, and it's, you know, Link is and if you understand who that Link is, the Link from the Oracle games and from Link to the Past, you understand that this Link is out, you know, trying to find more evil to destroy, and that's why he's out on a boat traveling to a new land that's not Hyrule, and it's not different lands. I forget exactly what the names are in Oracle Ages and Seasons.
Oh, right. Yeah, that'll be
Anyway,
those
but
reviews will come. Those
yeah,
games will be in the future for our podcast for sure. We need to retouch on
but
those.
like you understand that it's this Link who's super experienced, and he's traveling and he gets caught up in this thunderstorm, and for me, and then he ends up washing up on this mysterious island, and it's like
Mhm.
it's just a cool opening, I think, to start off a game, especially a game that was originally made on the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I like even just the music. I actually, I mean, we'll probably go into this later a little bit too, but the music overall, I just feel like they nailed it. They kept it close enough to where it was, all these the original NES game, the Zelda 2, Super Nintendo, like they brought all those old tracks and they just put a little twist on it. They had their own couple of tracks as well, but just right in the beginning, it's just kind of the da 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 and then da 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 da, and you just get like, oh, okay, good. But you're right, it's not a game that we have any nostalgic tied to, but because the other games that they share some characteristics, and then also the music, you're just like, this is Zelda, like let's go, Link, let's go, you get amped.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree. I think right off the bat, the kind of intro, that uniqueness of it sets it apart from some of the other Zelda games, especially the 2D Zelda games.
Yeah. And part of Zelda, though, I feel like there's consistent feel of almost like, not realism, but like the story makes a lot of sense, So like, for instance, Ocarina of Link, he is the chosen hero, the hero of time,
Right.
and the Great Decree knows this, and Ganondorf's the main bad guy. They need to, rescue Princess Zelda, or, help Princess Zelda escape, or gather spiritual stones, all these different things, and it's like it's just a natural good versus evil. But Link's
Right.
Awakening, it's like it has this awesome opener, but you get there and you're on this island with a big giant egg at the top, and it's like, oh, the windfish is in there, and you're like, what the heck is going on in this game? Like, when I first started playing it, that's honestly like, I'm used to a Zelda game where it's like you have the bad guy and you have Link, who's the good guy, and you typically have to save the princess, right? Zelda. There's kind of like that form to it, which works. It's a good formula, and that's why it's fun to play the games. But Link's Awakening is just so different from all that. It was quite a change for me. And honestly, when I first started playing the game, I was like, how can this game be like super great? It's just kind of like odd. It's just kind of weird. Like,
it is weird, and I think that's why it's kind of like any game that's weird, like Earthbound, or I mean, I don't know, I can't think off the top of my head, but games that are a little bit quirky, and I don't even know if they really took off at the time, but people go back to them. There's kind of like this cult following of like, oh, this game's so good because it's weird and it's different, And I think it's a little bit what turns me off of some of those games, because I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. It's like, a little cult following of these people who love this game just to love it kind of thing. But I really do think that this has the quirky elements do it justice, and it makes it, because of its uniqueness, it makes it something that is worth playing, because it's not the traditional, oh, okay, the bad guy's going to be Ganon, or some, rendition of Ganon, basically, or it's going to be one of his puppets, right? Like it's not that, and it's not you're going to save Zelda, you're going to save just yourself, almost, kind of, in this game.
Kind of.
And
you kind of don't even know when you start. You kind of don't even know what you're trying to do to say. Like, you need to wake the windfish. Yeah, it's like you get there and Marin's there to help you, and she's like, "Hey, wake up, whatever." And she takes you to the house, and then you don't have your items. Go back, get your shield. Go back, get your sword. Or well, they brought your shield. But anyway, it's like, and then you're like, well, what's the point? Like, you start the game, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Wake the windfish? But like, why do I need to do that?
Why do I want to?
That's why
do I need to? But you're just the way that Link is. He's just a hero, and he's like, I guess I just gotta go. Like,
yeah, but like as a player, like when I first started, I was like, this is interesting. Like, why? There's a lot, right? It's like a mystery game almost, and so you're like starting, and you're like trying to answer these questions. Like, okay, well, what is fish? Like, who are these people? Why is this island even here? And you have all these kind of to I think try to discover why Link is there, or why everything's there, to the point to where It kind of ends almost like a little bit ominously. I don't know, but
Yeah, no, I think so for sure. And I think like just the story overall, it's always you always feel a little bit of that until I mean, as slowly as you learn more and more, you're like, wait, okay, maybe this isn't real. Like maybe like
hmm
if I wake him up, everything goes away. So like, do I want to do that? Like it's kind of like you're playing games with your mind, I guess, the whole time. But I think because of that, it makes your brain's thinking. You're like constantly thinking about, oh,
hmm
that's kind of interesting. Even though you think it's weird and you're like, I don't know if I like that, but just the fact that it has you thinking like that nonstop, that's what makes it unique. And I think that's what makes it so good because you're constantly thinking of, whoa, wait, what's going to happen next? Or is this really going to happen? Or am I just kind of imagining this? So that's why I think the deviation from the regular kind of Zelda outline or almost a recipe for a Zelda game, it's cool that they didn't totally throw that away, but they just kind of deviated from it, took another route.
yeah, and I feel like I was saying before, it's not the typical go save the princess
Mm-hmm.
from Ganondorf or Ganon,
Right.
but there's still like a drive for you to go and progress through the game. It's not really a game for me the whole time playing. It wasn't like a game that I was like, eh, kind of bored right now. I'm just gonna put it
Yeah.
down for like a day or two. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I just kept playing because I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, oh, I'm gonna go here now. I'm gonna go there now. Like, oh, like I found this key that I can get into this new dungeon
Right. Well,
and
and I
and
think another
continue to
thing,
progress.
well, yeah, totally. And I think another thing, just kind of tying in on that, was the whole side quest thing. That's what kind of what kept it like
Mm.
moving along because, like you said, like, oh, I found this. Oh, hey, I think that that goes to this thing instead of just being a total linear path. Like, go to dungeon one, beat it, cool, you got a new item. Now try to find dungeon two, cool, you get a new item. Like, it's not like just boom, 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 boom. It has that traditional kind of linear landscape design as the other Zeldas, but then you also have that side quest that's kind of like a little bit intriguing, like the animal place. Like that didn't really need to have to exist, but there was a couple little
hmm
side quest things there, and it was cool to give kind of flesh out Marin a little bit, give her character a little bit of depth,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think I felt the same way for it the most part. Besides like the last two dungeons where I was just like, I hate this.
Yeah.
But
It's I think one of my favorite parts about the story and the progression really is like the characters being so unique, including the enemies. So like the main bosses, how like whenever you fought a boss, there would be dialogue to the boss, and he'd like say like ho ho ho, like
yeah, right,
you can't beat me or whatever. I just remember the like he was like a genie kind of enemy, and because he was in a pot though, like a little like vase looking thing,
right,
and he's like, oh, you can't hurt me with your sword because I'm in this vase thing. So you pick it up and throw it against the wall until it breaks, and then
yeah,
you can fight him. But it's like,
right,
and then the enemies have character to them, and the individual characters are very unique and have their individual like feel to them, right?
hmm,
Where Marin just isn't, just another character, another kind of princess figure that's there in the game. She actually, becomes your friend later in the game. To whereas at first you're just some random kid who washed ashore, and then near the end of the game you're somebody that she can confide in and talk about her dreams and like her wishes.
yeah.
So I
And
just think it's cool.
yeah, I agree with that in some points. My only thing, so I think the bosses were fun. They kind of most of them at least had kind of some kind of dialogue or characteristic to them where they kind of felt like I don't know, had some substance. But
hmm
yeah, the enemy variation was really cool. I enjoyed that. The one thing is I think that besides Marin and maybe the animals, not really. Like I just didn't care about anybody really. Like
True.
besides Marin. So like the witch, you go to her in the beginning and she boils up that powder stuff for you.
Never
But
see her again.
never see her again. And you think about the witches in like Majora's Mask and like that, or even in Ocarina, and like you see them multiple times. And when you see them, they're like they have, and again, yeah, it's 3D, and you have a little bit more of a visual to go off of. But there's dialogue, and their
hmm
story kind of gets built out. Like when you save the witch and give her the potion, who's out in the Lost Woods in Majora's Mask, like
hmm
there's a story to it. It's not just like, oh, roll up. Hey, here's this thing. Cool. All right. Do. Here's your potion. Never
Yeah.
see you.
I
So that
I
was one
feel
thing
like
that I
go
wish that
ahead.
they could have built out a little bit more was just some of
Yeah.
the characters and made the world feel a little bit more like, oh, if I, wake up the windfish, then all these people will go away. Like the only person was Marin. Besides that, you're like, meh, whatever.
Yeah, it's true.
as well.
And I definitely agree with that. There are some characters though that do have a little bit more depth. Like there's that one guy who's part of the trading quest. At first, he's the guy who has like the 3 kids and the baby with his
Oh, right.
wife.
Yeah.
And so you first talk to him and he's like, "Oh yeah, I don't remember what he says,
Oh,
but
you're seeing him in
you
the
like,
mountains. Yeah.
yeah." And you see him later in the mountains, but like his wife is the one who starts the trading quest with the Yoshi doll, and then you trade something. You give him a pineapple so he can get back on his
Yeah.
feet, right? And
But
so
first
like,
in the house, he does say that, hey, if you like, you might see me up in the mountains. Like he goes up there, and so he's like, you might need to help me out.
yeah,
And okay. And then you
yeah,
just,
and then there's the fisherman who's also part of the trading quest.
uh-huh.
Later at the very end, where originally he's like fishing, and he's like, when you're done fishing, he's like, "Oh well, you want to go to the ocean or like the lake or whatever?" And you're like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Just kidding, like
Yeah.
forget I said anything."
Yeah, you're like,
But
okay.
and then some of the kids that are playing with the balls or throwing the ball back and forth, and then
Uh-huh.
another one's just roaming around. They're they have different dialogue, which is nice. They give you hints and stuff, and then I think it's funny because then they're like, "Oh, but don't ask me what that means. I'm just a kid," you know. They're
Yeah,
like,
and I felt like the charm from the characters was there, and it was fun. I just meant like the depth. Like you're just like, the world ends. I don't care about this kid.
"True,
They give me a giggle,
true."
but I
Hmm.
think what you're saying, like the overall charm of the game, there's a lot of charm to the game, and that's what I
Yeah,
think
it reminds me
so
of
well with people.
a ROM hack to where it feels like, because like you said, it's a side story. Like when they were making Link to the Past, correct?
Yeah,
It was kind of like a side game that some developer was just like probably having fun with his friends, other developer friends. And they're like, yeah, let's make this game where Link's all in a dream. There's this big old egg at the top. Like they could have just had throwing
well,
ideas off of each
it's
other
and
and
that's
then
kind
just
of what
making the
happened.
dialogue funny.
Yeah, and that's
You
kind of
know?
what happened is that there's going to be people out there that watch this that are going to obviously know more than us on the history, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
from what I do remember is that I think I think the main Mario dude, I'm not going to try to say his name, I'm totally butcher it. But then also the Zelda team like came together, and that's why there are Mario characters in this game, like the Goombas.
Yeah.
See like a lot of the other different enemies that are carried over from Mario's because they kind of collaborated. And a lot of different development teams, especially ones like a Nintendo, I don't know if it's after work or if it's like a certain part of time on or a certain amount of time on Friday, they get set aside to do their own projects so they don't get burned out. And so I think that's kind of how this developed. And it's also cool because there's a lot of aspects from this game. I mean, obviously, any Zelda game is in some way or another affected by its predecessor, I guess you could say, right? So like Ocarina
Like
of Time.
previous Zelda game, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
predecessor, perfect.
yeah, and so any game that came before it, it's going to pull some of those assets from it. Maybe not actual visual assets. So like Skyward Sword didn't necessarily pull from Ocarina of Time at all for visual aspects.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's certain things in the game, like whether it was heart pieces or dungeons or enemies, whatever it might be, that they pulled inspiration from for new games. And the cool thing about it is Link's Awakening actually did bring a lot of, or maybe not a lot, but a decent amount of things over into Ocarina of Time, because Ocarina of Time was the next game that came out. I mean, there's the owl, there's the ocarina itself, right? And so there's kind of a few things that are pretty cool that you get to see, like this game, it's not just like a little side game and kind of cutesy, like it actually had substance that they pulled into Ocarina, right? Like it's pretty rad.
Definitely.
It's pretty sweet.
So I mean, I think as far as like the gameplay goes, it was very unique. It did like create its own things, like you were talking about, like the different Mario characters.
Unique. That's just to be like our word for this game. Unique.
Yeah.
This game is unique.
The unique Zelda game.
Yeah.
I'm terrible with my my diction, I guess, because I can't think of other words. But
it's a perfect word, though. It's a perfect word.
Yeah. Anyway, it's very original. Of a game. I'll find synonyms. But just like you were saying, the different Mario characters, Bow, but they all have different names. You see that, like the Bow Wow instead of Chomp, and he's a friend. He doesn't hurt you, and he eats all your enemies, which is awesome. But then you have you have like the Goomba looking guys. You have in the Eagles Tower there was like evil Kirby. Remember that?
Oh yeah. I was when he was like sucking up. I was like, "That's Kirby."
Yeah, and then on the beach at the very beginning, there's the spike balls that are from Kirby, and so pulled
Oh
from Kirby too.
yeah, I didn't even
So
realize that.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, and it pulled from Yoshi, obviously the Yoshi doll.
Yeah,
So like all
it was,
sorts of different,
they called it Yoshi
different.
too, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. It
And it
was
was
the
like,
Yoshi doll. It's like,
because
all right,
yeah, not even trying to
but
avoid that one.
that's what's kind of funny to me is it kind of like the game breaks the fourth wall a few times with all
Yeah,
that sort of stuff, where it pulls from the different parts of Nintendo, but
and
it
I'm gonna use this.
also
I'm gonna use this word again, but that is a unique thing at that time to have a break the fourth
yeah
wall back then. Like that's
yeah
crazy.
yeah and I feel like pulling from the different aspects of different games, um, it it was obviously it wasn't seen before, but it makes it to where like I don't know it's almost like you know how it links in a dream.
Uh-huh.
It's almost as if like we're in the dream with Link. You know,
Yeah,
it's
right.
like oh we're dreaming of a Zelda game, but I was playing Mario earlier that week, and I'm also dreaming about like Mario characters are in that dream as well. And so
Right.
it's like Link's Awakening is like him from a dream from a collaboration of all the different Nintendo games. And I think that's kind of a part that's kind of funny. Like you can kind of like be in the shoes of the developers and thinking like, oh, since Link is technically like having a nightmare or a dream, or the Windfish is having this nightmare and he's being dragged into the nightmare of the Windfish,
Hmm.
and the part of the nightmare is all these different games from or all these different characters from different games. Like I just think that's like the developers I think were really like probably trying to connect that
Oh
in a
yeah, for
way.
sure. No, I totally agree. And
So
I really enjoyed how when we first did the Goombas and it goes to the 2D aspect, like the side scrolling
mhm.
aspect, not 2D, obviously the whole thing's 2D. But when it goes side
Yeah.
scrolling, it kind of pulls from Mario, but also uh, Venture of Link, Zelda 2. And I thought
Mhm.
that was cool because we didn't grow up playing Zelda 2, but playing it, I think we had it on like a Game Boy Advance cartridge or something. Like there was I remember playing it on the Game Boy Advance when we were getting
Really?
older. Yeah, we had one, and I remember playing it for a little bit, and I was like, "This game is garbage. Whoever this game is
Yeah.
the worst." And but now that I played it now, I actually like it. Like I think it's fun and it's a
Mhm.
different idea, and so I thought that was kind of cool that they did put in a side-scrolling aspect to the game. And it's kind of like a random thought that just popped in my head, but I think that was cool that they decided to add that because again, it's one of those things that's like that doesn't really fit in
Yeah.
maybe the Zelda formula, but we're gonna use it anyway because whatever, this is kind of
Yeah.
a game. So
Well, it adds depth to the gameplay, I think, to where you can have a little bit more experiences with one game, different types of gameplay with one game. And I
yeah,
think that's cool.
yeah,
And granted, like they didn't have like I mean, I'm just thinking of other types of like gameplay they would have on the Game Boy Color. Like, there's no like racing aspect like you see like an F-Zero game where it's like you just control your left and right movement and the screen comes towards you. There
uh-huh.
wasn't anything like that, but still there's more than one aspect to play the game instead of an overview like normal Zelda games of that time. It had overview and the side view, like side scroller view, like you're saying, and so it's cool. It's one of the only Zelda games I can think of that has that depth in gameplay. So I thought that
Yeah,
was really cool.
yeah, and I think to kind of go along with the gameplay, something that I've thought about while I was playing the game was how when you go through your inventory, you actually have to pull out your shield and your sword because that was kind of the limitation of the Game Boy. There's only two buttons,
Mm-hmm.
and to save the game, you have to press all four buttons. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. That
Yeah,
I feel like it's the best thing they could do for the system, right? But because it was on that system rather than the Super Nintendo with four buttons and then the R and L button, that takes away from the experience. For me, it did at least because having to play your shield all the time when Link to the Past, as long as your shield's facing a certain way, like it's going to block whatever comes and hits you.
yeah,
So
yeah. That's
that was
true.
something that was annoying or obnoxious to me. And then also the fact that your sword's just not always like it's not always your sword. You can't and swap it. You have to swap that out to be something else. And it's a little bit nitpicky, but it was just annoying enough to have to constantly be going into the menu constantly.
Yeah,
Every
I
time
agree.
you
I
go
agree.
into the next screen, into the menu again. Next screen, go into the menu again. Just because you have to change to get your bracelet to lift things up, or to get your sword back out again,
Mm-hmm.
or to do the running boots and the jump, or to get the running boots and the sword. Because if you don't have your sword together, then you're not. If you're running, your sword's not going to be out. It's you're just be running.
Yeah.
So
whereas
going.
Yeah, like or as far as like the sword in the Pegasus boots,
Yeah,
you have in other games, I believe in Link to the Past, I believe that your sword is always out when you use the Pegasus boots, right? It's just sticking forward.
As far as I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, that was pretty annoying to me. And something that I feel like could have fixed that, that's another annoying aspect of it, is just the maneuverability of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, sure, in any top view Zelda games like Link to the Past, Minish Cap, you to get from one area to the map to another area of the map, you typically have to take a kind of roundabout way to get there.
Yeah.
But in those other games, there was a reliable way of fast traveling. I felt like, or if you got a certain item, it was way easier to maneuver through the map. Whereas in Link's Awakening, it felt like when you got a new item, it didn't really help you that much. Like obviously, you could get into new areas,
right? But you're not getting across the map any faster than before.
Yeah. And then like when I got the ocarina, and I got Mambo's Mambo, the Fishes song, and I was like, oh, like when I read his dialogue, I thought it meant like there's going to be specific like shallow bodies of water, and whenever you enter that shallow body of water, you can like play the ocarina, and it'll like save that spot as like a fast travel spot.
Right.
And then you kind of can just like kind of work your way. You play the song and it takes you one spot. You play it again, it'll take you to a different spot. You play it again. Like I was assuming that was like a new way of fast traveling, but then in the end, it's just like it sends you. Where does it send you to? The one chick's house.
I think it sends you to the last body of water you're in, or the last place that you exited, or something. I didn't even use it.
No. Well, I used it a couple times, and when you're in a dungeon, it sends you to the beginning of the dungeon.
Right.
And when it was Crazy Tracy's house. I forget what she did though. I forget her purpose in the game. Was she part of the trading quest?
Yes, and then that was it. I feel like. I think.
Yeah. So it sends you to the body of water right in front of her house.
Yeah.
And the body of water is just like I don't know, like 3 or 4 screens up and to the right of the village.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's not too far from the village, which was like kind of nice, but like every time I used it, I was just like, why? What's the purpose of like?
Yeah,
of this song?
They could have had it. They could have had you travel to some of the warp zone places. Like that would have been more beneficial if you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, or add more warp zones because like you have one in the last dungeon, not even like before the last dungeon. It's like midway through the last dungeon. You have one that's kind of like the northern middle part, like where the waterfalls are at, and it's like okay, that's like a decent place to be. And then one's by the animal village, and you're just like, why? Like, first off, I need to get to a warp point to even use it.
Yeah,
and then it's just going to send me to locations.
Right, and that's something that I felt like it was. I don't think the limitations of the Game Boy prevented it from being able to do that. It was just something that they didn't implement. Like they tried to change it, but that changed from Link to the Past, where you could use your flute to go. You could fly and go different places. Like that was way more beneficial, and it's way less annoying because it's still nice to go back through certain areas of the map, but that's what you go do when you're looking for like heart pieces or other things where you're like, oh, I need to get all the way over there to go to a dungeon or something. It just seems like a hassle. Like it doesn't even feel adventure anymore. You're just like, oh my gosh, I have to do this again.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
That was something that I felt was a little bit frustrating for me with the game. But again, these are kind of nitpicks that I'm trying to come up with that maybe distracted me from the story a little bit, and if they were removed, and hopefully in this next game, obviously they're gonna have the Switch to use, so better graphics, better gameplay, more buttons. Like there's gonna be the gameplay is gonna be so different.
I bet I'll bet that you'll have your sword and shield just always on you like normal games, and then you'll just have your extra 2 buttons for using your other items,
and even the shoulders too, the shoulder buttons too.
True.
And I just feel like if they do that, that will, and maybe flesh out the story and some of the characters a little bit more, then that is going to make the game so much more enjoyable. Whether I think even regardless of whether you think the new art style with the claymation-ish kind of looking, plasticky kind of look, even if you don't love that look, you're still going to enjoy the newer version of the game just because they're able to kind of diminish some of those things that took away from the original experience,
definitely.
At least.
What did you think about? Because I have a kind of nitpicky thought about the items in general, like the usage of the items that you get.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because
I'll
tell you how I feel, but
okay, yeah,
I'll let you say.
My thought on that is, I don't think for a Zelda game, I didn't feel like it was that bad, because I think there's a lot of Zelda games that they do that. They're like, oh, here's your new item, and this is what it does, and you're like, okay, cool, it gets you through the boss, and then like you maybe use it again.
Yeah.
And
well,
I mean, especially with, I don't know if it's Skyward Sword or if it's Twilight Princess, but I feel like there's just items that you get and then you like never use them again, and so it's kind of
the spinner is kind of like that in Twilight Princess. Yeah. You use it a lot in one dungeon.
That's actually
and then you use it like a couple other times, but
yeah. And
so what I was thinking is that like there are a few different items. We already talked about the ocarina and kind of how like the Mambo song at least was kind of useless, but like you can use it twice, like for two different purposes. Get to the beginning of a dungeon when you're in there, or get to that one specific body of water. And I just feel like that could have been, you could have used it more, right?
Yeah.
Or the song, Marin's song, the only purpose, absolutely the only purpose for it, as far as I know, was to open up the fish's egg, the windfish's egg.
Exactly.
To where I was like, I feel like kind of like the Zelda's Lullaby and Ocarina of Time, how it had a lot of different uses, but then like if you cut up a sign and then you play the song in front of the sign, it fixes the sign. Just like a dumb little like kind of funny Easter egg would have been kind of cool to include. And my thought process was, because I had the ocarina when I went to the walrus, right? And the walrus is sleeping in front of the desert, and so I'm trying to get him out of there. And so you have to go all the way back to the freaking village and find Marin, and then bring Marin all the way to the dude. And so I was like, oh, sweet. I already have Marin's song. He wakes up to Marin's song, so I'm just going to play Marin's song. I play Marin's song, and it's like, still sleeping. I'm like, really? Like, I just feel like that could have been like a little bit like, just like I don't know. It's nitpicking, obviously, but.
Like a word, and then not able to do it without having to go grab her and bring her all the way there.
Yeah. Anyway, so the ocarina was one thing that I felt like they could have utilized a little bit better. Maybe not that much, but just more like Link to the Past used the flute.
Boomerang was OP.
Yeah, Boomerang was OP, but I kind of like that.
I mean, it was fun because when you got it, you were like, I'm invincible.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the Boomerang was was pretty OP. The magic powder you could use for a few different purposes. Actually, I might take that back, because you could use the magic powder to put it in the wells to get upgrades on your stuff.
Oh yeah,
use it on some
and fire.
You could use it on some items. Use it for okay. So I'll take that back. The magic powder was used pretty well, but the magnifying glass was another one that I was feeling was.
Oh yeah.
The only purpose really was to get the Boomerang.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you walk in that you're on the beach and you walk in the tunnel, and the guy's like trades you for the Boomerang. But otherwise, without the magnifying glass, he's not there. So
that means that the magnifying glass is the most important item in the game, because that's what got us to the Boomerang. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but I feel like it could have been used more for other purposes than like show one dude.
Yeah, no, I get that.
In a cave.
See that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like overall the game was, again, I'm going to use it again, unique, quirky, it was cute, it was fun. I thought that for a 2D Zelda game, and for us having no nostalgic tie to it, that it is definitely something, if someone was in our same shoes, that they're like Zelda, never played it before, it's definitely a game worth playing. And it's not that long, not terribly long, so you don't feel like you have to invest all this time into it. And if you go into it just to enjoy it, again, this is kind of one of our rules with these reviews that'll tie into the next videos, the next podcasts that we do. We want to, the only time we ever look up something is if we're just stuck, we cannot figure it out, just to help us progress through, because obviously if I just had all the time in the world to play games, would never look up any kind of, secrets or whatever to figure out what we need to do. But we're not going to look through any walkthroughs. We're not going to go through walkthroughs to just beat the game just to beat it. We want to experience these games as best as we can while still, getting through them at a decent speed, decent amount of time, but not ruining the experience with the walkthrough, because it does ruin the experience. I did that with Earthbound. People are going to crucify me for that because people get so crazy about Earthbound. And I still love the game, but I would have loved the game so much more if I hadn't used a walkthrough. I know I would have. And if I got stuck, that's fine, But that's kind of our rules for ourselves that Brian and I have talked about before. So with this game, having done that, if other people do the same thing, it really brings out the story a little bit more, and you kind of get to go a little bit deeper in the story without feeling like, the next dungeon, cool, beat the game, okay, next game,
Yeah, but on top of that, I feel like it's the concept of, if you work hard for something, you're going to appreciate it more, right? And so,
sure.
If you try to compare it to real life, it's kind of hard. But for instance, for something where you don't have to work hard to get all big and muscly, like big and strong and in shape,
right?
Everybody would do it, and nobody would appreciate it, right? And so, like, same thing with gaming. If you play a game and you're like, I'm just stuck in this one part, or like if you're like kind of like me and completionist, where you want to just like complete something as fast as you possibly can. I don't know like why I'm like that, but I am. And like there's a part of me that's just like, I just want to like figure out what this is. And then if I go to a walkthrough and I like do a walkthrough the whole entire game and I beat the game, I'll be like, all right, sweet. But like if I actually take the time to do it myself and figure out all these things, and honestly, you put a lot more extra time into it, and that could be annoying for some people or not. But like you put all this time into it, and then you finally figure something out, and you're like, sometimes like in Link's Awakening, I figure something out. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's all I had to do. Like, this is so simple. And it's like, sometimes you're like, are you kidding me? But then other times you're like, yes, I did it. Like, yes, I don't know. And so, it's just, I think it's more rewarding when you don't use a walkthrough.
Yeah, that's why obviously we made this rule, so that when people watch, they're like, oh, they just didn't like fly through the game. We actually sat down and we played it to really evaluate that nostalgic feel, and to see if these games, if they really do play well, and if you play through it like any N64 game we play through, if we hadn't played it before, we're going to see if it has a Nintendo 64 nostalgic feel. So we might not have a nostalgia tied to the game because we played it as little kids, but Conqueror's Bad Fur Day, we never had that game as a kid, but playing it, does it feel like a rare game? Does it feel like an N64 game? Does that bring that nostalgic factor? So I feel like, this video, this wasn't super in depth, because I don't think that Link's Awakening is a crazy in depth game. It's not really what it's meant to be. It has kind of a deep story, kind of, right? Because it's a different thinking, but it's not really that deep. It's just like, you could dive deep if you wanted to, but basically the whole thing was a dream. That's a simple part of it, right? And so, and you can dive deeper, like I said, but the game itself is, for the most part, fairly simple. And that's kind of I think why we wanted to start off with this, just to get a feel for the podcast. And now, moving forward, I believe we're going to go into N64 now, and go into Banjo-Kazooie. And that's exciting for us, because we never beat that as kids.
Yeah.
And now we get to go back and beat these games and talk about it and see what we really love about it, and kind of compare that to what other people have said in the past, whether they played it, as they've been adults, or whether they have some nostalgic, reminiscent tie to it.
Yeah. And not only that, but I think it helps us appreciate the games that we play nowadays even more.
Yeah.
Because we have all these old games that we'll be playing and going through and beating as if we were back then playing this game without internet, without Nintendo Power, or any walk, right?
Right.
And to help us appreciate how games have evolved and where games are now. But also, one thing that we're going to do, we talked about this, in between weeks, that we can do other things like, because it'll be very difficult, even with older games, to beat them in a week and then be able to organize our thoughts in a way to where it would
schedules.
Yeah, and so we won't be doing we won't be beating games and talking about them weekly. It'll be every other week, and in between weeks we'll be doing other videos, other podcast style videos of top tens or other kind of
other gaming news.
discussions, news and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Comparisons, yeah, absolutely. And so I think that this is something exciting for us, definitely, but also something exciting just for the channel because we get to keep it alive and keep it growing. And that was our vision in the beginning. And I feel like this has kind of helped us hit our kind of find our stride a little bit and find our niche. So so going forward, the Farley Power Podcast, this will be us, Brian and I, as well as we will have some guests to come onto the show and to talk about games with us, the games that we review, and basically just find out what games are good and what games are bad that are old retro games.
So overall, Sean, what would you, if somebody asked you and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about playing Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening," what do you think about that game? What would be your response?
My response would be, it's an awesome game. It's a good game that you should play. If you like Zelda, you should play this game, especially if you like the old 2D Zeldas. And it has a very charming aspect to it that kind of breaks the fourth wall, makes it fun, and it's worth a play. That's what I would say. If I had to rank it on from 1 to 10, I would probably say, just overall as a game, just to play, 7.28.
7.28. Nice.
So it's not like the most
yeah.
pressing game to play, but it's definitely a game that I feel like it should be played. It's a fun game.
Yeah.
So
it's a game. I agree with you for the most part. It's a game that should be played. It's not like a need to play,
right?
Like by any means, but it's definitely, if you're a Zelda fan, like you said, it's a game that you should play. You should see what it's about, why people like it, and you'll find the reasons why you like it. Because I like it because it feels so much like a ROM hack. I've played so many ROM hacks, and I like that it breaks that fourth wall. That's like one of the biggest aspects for me, where it's just different. It's a little weird. Like, I wasn't the biggest fan of like the egg, the fish, the windfish, and everything, but like I liked the charm, like you said, the charm of the game, and
I just like anywhere Hyrule. Give me Termina. Give me this faraway island that's just like Link is like, where am I?
And if I were to rate it, I would agree somewhere on the 7 scale. I was actually going to give it a little bit higher, more like 7.5.
Basically,
basically,
I'll round up to that. Yeah. I think that's a good 7.5 is a good ranking for us for the game. Other people love it, probably put it on like closer to a 9 or higher. Some people maybe not like it at all, but
yeah,
our opinion.
Welcome. It's a should play.
Yeah, it's a should play. It's a should play. You should play it. Don't need to complete it and grab every single thing in the game, but there's little things you find along the way that are fun, and you should play it. And if you want to beat it, go for it. But it's definitely something you should at least try, especially if you just ROM. Play it as a ROM on your phone.
Oh, super easy. Yeah.
Maybe go buy it and buy a Game Boy and everything. Easy thing to pick up. Any computer or phone will play this ROM. So anyway, I think that's basically it, Brian. You have anything else to say about the game, about the podcast?
No. Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. Well, until next week when we touch on who knows what, but we will be diving into Banjo-Kazooie for our next review, which will be probably the week after this upcoming week. So until next time,
we'll see ya.